So let's hit the tab key and then start typing for each. And of course, we're going to be using that for each name primitive like we did earlier. So just hit that down arrow and hit enter. And we're going to drop our poly reduced geometry, source geometry right here into this for each node. I also want to give a shout out to Louise Cruel over at Houdini for walking me through these basic workflows and how he would tackle these problems. You know, watching him step through these problems, you can see his videos on the Houdini website and on Vimeo on his channel. And watching him problem solve has made this process so much easier for me to simply follow along, bring out the nodes that he uses, and kind of safely follow along in a nice linear fashion, but also expose me to the power of Houdini and got me to do a little exploration on my own and started getting me excited again about the game development process. Instead of doing a bunch of manual stuff, we get to do really cool stuff like this for each loop, for example. So let's go ahead and take our polyreduce node here. We're going to drop that into our for each. And in this for each, what we're going to be doing is voxelizing each one of these pieces individually. So let's go ahead and drop in, to start typing in voxel, you'll get the game dev voxel mesh, and I'm just going to drag that and plug that right in between these two nodes. Oops, didn't connect. Let's go ahead and just connect these down. And this is also something I want to mention. I don't do it very often, but down here in this auto update section, you can always change this to manual update, and then you need to hit this little button right here in order for your nodes to cook. So if you're ever doing anything and you know it's going to be processing intensive, you can always change it over to manual, do all your node work, and then go ahead and change that either back to auto update or just hit this button here and it'll manually cook through your nodes. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to auto. And for this SOP voxel mesh here, I'm going to go ahead and change that resolution preset down to low, just so we can kind of quickly evaluate what's going on. And then on this for each loop, go ahead and select that and make it visible. Just like we went through before, if you click on the single pass here, you can now use this slider to cycle through all the different pieces that make up our ship. And if you turn that off, you're going to see the entire ship. You're going to notice that there is voxelization resolution differences between the different objects here. So we can find a really small one maybe. You can see the main body of the ship is at a fairly low resolution, than these pieces here are at a little bit higher. What this voxel mesh node by default is doing is making them all, every single piece, the same bounding box size, voxelizing them, and then putting them back into place. If you don't want that to happen, turn off this bounding box relative off, and now you're going to get a much more uniform distribution of your voxel meshes. And again, this isn't voxelized together. We can still go back to our for each node and turn on and have single pass turned on, and you can see all the pieces separate. Because now I know it looks like they're all stuck together, but you can see these individual pieces are still being voxelized separately. If this is too high res for you, all you got to do is, instead of going to low, let's go to custom. And now it's at 0.1. If we change this to like say 0.025, you can dial that in. And just like we went over before, you can change this adaptivity, so say 0.01. You can start collecting geometry in the areas where there's a lot of surface change. If you want to capture any extra meshes, or if you're getting any holes in your geometry, I don't really see any. Let's go ahead and change the resolution down to 0.01 so we can kind of maybe explore some of this. So like we went over before, if you want to keep your resolution high, but you also want to close up holes like these, you can also dilate this out, let's say 1. That'll inflate your mesh, and then you can project it back to the original, and that'll go ahead and close up any small holes you may have in between your geo that you want your game res to ignore. Now, after you've projected, you can also put in some post-smooth iterations if you want to relax some of these transitional areas here. And you can also turn on sharpen features in order to get those crispy edges back on your voxelized surface based on this edge tolerance right here. For our purposes, though, I'm just going to keep this simple. I'll put dilate back to 0, adaptivity back to 0, and let's say 0.02 for our resolution. But like I mentioned before, if you did want to do a fine-tooth comb through here, you can go to the single pass and then just inspect anything for any weird issues, and you can always blast those pieces off separately. So if you wanted to say blast, we'll just go ahead and choose body, and then we'll hit delete non-selected, and now we're just left with the body mesh. And you can do whatever you'd like to here separately. Oops, accidentally shook that off. You can do whatever you'd like to separately to this node, and then just merge it back in later. But we'll go ahead and skip that for now. And there's one more thing before we move on. When we are up here in this polyreduce, and again, we do on this select icon, and we want to select by name attribute, for example, we can go through here and we have name attributes. If you middle mouse click over here, you see we have primitive attributes, 2 of them. We have name and polygroup. If we hit this plus sign here and go to the geometry spreadsheet, and we go to the primitive section right here, you can see again we have name and polygroup. So different names and different polygroup assignments. We went over this in detail in the previous videos. However, when we go to our voxel mesh here, we've lost that name information. You can see we just have a surface here. If we middle mouse click on here, we still have a primitive name attribute, but it's just got 1 unique. Whereas in this one we have 15 unique names. So let's go ahead and get those back. I'm going to hit tab and start typing in transfer attribute. We'll grab an attribute transfer node. And just like we did before, I'm going to plug our voxel mesh into the left side, our attribute transfer, our for each here into the right side, and then both of these results are going to go in that back into that left side of the for each node. So we're going to voxelize, transfer those names back, and then go back to the for each. So if I click on the for each node and make that visible, and we go ahead and let's turn off single pass. And we look at the results, and you can go ahead and turn off this color groups and viewports. You can see by default what it's transferring. If we go ahead and click on the attribute transfer to get access to its parameters up here, you're going to see by default we have points turned on, and that's transferring the point data, or in this case the polypaint data, the vertex color data, onto our voxel mesh, which is totally cool if you want to use that. We don't need that, so I'm going to check that off. But what we do need is primitive information. And again, if I middle mouse click, the primitive attribute we're looking to keep is this name. So we're going to say primitives, use this drop down and choose name. So now when I click on this for each node here, we've got our names back, and they're all assigned to the correct voxelized pieces of themselves.